Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the content patch for the 29th of January 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, Dead Space 3's executive producer defends the PC port, Dead Space 3 to include microtransactions, I'm not kidding, Blizzard All-Stars held up by new business model and various trademark problems, and Tomb Raider skips the Wii U in order to, quote, avoid half-hearted port. A report on the site Games on Net last week, which was then cited by PC Gamer and a variety of other networks, indicated that the Dead Space 3 port for PC would be somewhat bare bones. The claim was that the game would be a straight port of the console version, which would not include support for DirectX 11, no additional high-resolution features, and no further graphical enhancements above and beyond those seen on the PS3 or Xbox 360. Speaking with Shack News, the executive producer of Visceral Games, as well as Dead Space 3, Steve Papoutis, stated that it was confusing to him that the question even comes up, and that it's by no means any less important to us to create a PC port, and it gets a lot of attention. The PC is a very different platform, he says. As developers, you want to deliver an experience that's as similar as possible on different platforms. Confusingly, half a paragraph down in the interview, he claimed that we continue to evolve our games as we develop them, but we certainly don't target PC as something that's going to be significantly different. We aren't trying to create disparity in the experience that our gamers enjoy. We want to make sure everyone's going to have that same experience. He then went on to say that the biggest thing is that we want to make sure the quality of the experience is consistent across all platforms, so we don't have one user base saying it's better on their system. God damn it. This is the problem with this attitude. It is an awful idea. It's fine for it to be better on a different system if the system itself is better. Why is that so difficult to understand? I mean, we can look at the contradiction in this earlier. It said, well, the PC is a very different platform. And then lower down it says, the PC is not a significantly different platform. Which is it? Come on, it's not really that hard to get your story straight, one would think. The thing is that if you're developing for 8-year-old hardware, you should expect it to be pretty limited, and it is. That's why you get 720p. In fact, these days, a lot of games are actually rendered even lower than that and then upscaled simply because 8-year-old hardware can't handle it. They're gonna be at 30 frames per second, they're gonna be at a low FOV without a lot of the bells and whistles because it's old hardware. It should be better on PC if your PC is the right spec, because it's newer hardware. PC's hardware spectrum and capability continually evolves. So, why exactly is it okay to develop games for console, then just chuck them on PC and say, oh, it'll be fine? It will not be fine. When you develop games with low resolution, you don't start that way. You don't create your textures in 800 by 600 or whatever. You create them in far higher resolution and then you downscale them for the console. You have the high resolution assets. It's incredibly bizarre to think that there could be a studio that deliberately develops from the very get-go in low resolution. Surely you would never do that. Ever. You would optimize later on. You would start high resolution, then you would scale it down to the point where you think that the system can actually handle it, and then you would optimize from that point. That would make more sense, right? So I have to assume that this is the case, and there's plenty of other examples of this being the case. The recent Dark Souls port is a great example of this. The port was locked to the same resolution that the console is, and yet it was unlocked quite quickly by modders. And suddenly, oh look, the game didn't actually have those muddy textures at all. The high-resolution stuff was there. It was just restricted by the program. And why is it not okay for one version to be better than the others? This has been happening forever. Every time a new system comes out and you get releases on that system, there are pushes by the people that made that system in the first place to say, hey, look at how much better our version is. That's how the console war and the console cycle actually works. This happened with the 360. This happened with the Dreamcast. I remember buying Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 on the Dreamcast and saying, oh my god, how amazing does this look in comparison to the PS1 version. What about Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter or Fight Night Round 3? These were two very early titles for the Xbox 360. How much better did they look compared to the Xbox and PS2 versions? Much, much better. Nobody complained about that. They understood that it was a reality of hardware evolution. This is the current situation with consoles and PC. Because consoles are so old, we naturally expect PC versions to be better because there is literally no excuse for them not to be. The only reason you do this is that you are lazy and you don't view the PC as an important platform. And you know what? I can kind of understand why you wouldn't view the PC as an important platform, but this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. People pirate games on PC, and people avoid buying games on PC because even though they have much more expensive hardware, they still get the same experience as an 8-year-old console. There's always going to be piracy and nonsense like that, but don't give people an excuse. This is one of those times. If a developer makes it clear that they are not making a proper version of a game for PC, I can pretty much guarantee that people are going to go out of their way to rip it off. It's like, oh, they're not fulfilling their part of the bargain, so I'm not going to fulfill mine, right? I have a powerful gaming PC. If this version is locked at 30 FPS, if this version has no FOV slider, if this version has really low resolution textures because you couldn't be bothered to put those features into the PC version, even though the PC is more than capable of it, then I couldn't care less for your profit margin, is the attitude of a lot of people. And do you blame them for that? Well, I don't think piracy is the answer, but I can definitely understand why they wouldn't purchase it. The whole point is that the PC can be better than consoles right now. And as a result, yes, you should be able to get a PC version that ends up being better. We didn't buy PCs so we can have a console-like experience. There's a reason why a high-end PC can cost upwards of 10 times more than a console. That's because it's more powerful. We expect a better experience. It's like saying, well, we didn't bother with a Blu-ray release for this because a lot of people still use DVD players and we wouldn't want them to get jealous of the Blu-ray copy. That's bollocks. That's absolute nonsense. You don't film in DVD resolution. You downscale to DVD resolution. Hell, you don't film in Blu-ray resolution. You often film much higher than that. We're talking 4K. We're talking even higher resolutions than that. That's what you film in. You don't then just say, well, it would be unfortunate if everyone couldn't get the same experience. Welcome to reality. Not everyone has the same gear. To continue the rather terrible news on Dead Space 3 will be including microtransactions. Talking to Eurogamer, the associate producer for Dead Space 3, Yara Kori, explained that you don't have to spend real-world dollars, but you can buy resources with real money. However, scavenger bots can also give you the currency that you can use on the marketplace. The content, however, is gated to ensure that you can't actually buy the best weapons from the start. He said there are a lot of weapon parts that are only available to buy later in the game unless you're playing it again on New Game Plus. Well, Whoopity-Doo-Dah Day, a survival horror game, supposedly, that allows you to buy your way to victory. Well, that surely keeps the tension going, doesn't it? This is incredibly dumb. This is unbelievably dumb. And I hate this. I mean, how could I not? How could anyone say, oh, this sounds like a great idea? Thank God they decided to put that in because it was inconvenient to scavenge for resources in my horror game and to feel like, oh God, am I going to be able to survive? It makes me think there's just no way that this could actually be a scary horror game. The very notion that I can just put in my credit card to get every weapon that I want and I have available to me at the time without having to scavenge around, look for stuff, and potentially get scared out of my wits on the way. Yeah, that just sounds awful. This is not the first time that a game has done this, although it is, in my opinion, the most blatant and the most ridiculous. A couple of other examples of games that did this fairly recently: Mass Effect 3 for the multiplayer, the reinforcement pack system, and the multiplayer for Assassin's Creed 3. They both had those options. The thing is that those were multiplayer games. Now, Dead Space 3 might have co-op, but it's primarily a single-player title. You were not able to buy stuff like that in Mass Effect 3 single player, and you weren't able to buy your way to victory in Assassin's Creed 3 either. And yet Dead Space 3 is just saying to you, well, it's okay if you can't gather the resources for these weapons, you can just build it with real money. This is absurd. This is absolutely absurd. This is the free-to-play business model, only without the free. Destructoid recently described this practice as fee-to-pay. Another example, of course, being on iOS. There's plenty of those, but more blatantly, Final Fantasy All the Bravest, which costs you money to start with and then continually costs you money if you want to do bloody anything in the game. This should not be anywhere near our video games. It absolutely should not be. This is not about buying skin or costume DLC later down the line after the games come out. This is about launching the game on day one with the ability to buy stuff in a single-player campaign that is, without question, unbelievably stupid and absurdly exploitative. Now, the counter-argument to that is, well, you don't have to buy it. Yeah, you're right, but the very notion that you can that it's just sort of lingering beneath the surface is just an unbelievable shattering of tension. This is a horror game, supposedly. It's most likely going to end up being more of an action game, but Dead Space was a horror series. And the fact of the matter is that that horror disappears fairly rapidly if you know that you can be armed to the teeth thanks only to the powers of your American Express card. You remember how people complained about the DLC vendor that was in the camp in Dragon Age Origins, and rightfully so? That stuff should not be in the main game. That stuff should be kept aside, because yes, you're trying to immerse people into a story and a world. You can't do that if you're going to try and sell them stuff with real money. Real money should have absolutely nothing to do with it. Everything should be inside the game's universe. That's a solid reason for those saying, well, it doesn't matter because you don't have to buy it. That's damage that it does to everybody. But there's way more than that. You can take it way, way further. When you design a game in such a way, there is a big temptation to make items difficult to acquire, so it's more likely that people will simply give in and pay some money for it because they can't be bothered. That's a huge risk, and that is not something that I trust any company with, honestly. I don't. Because at the end of the day, they're out for profit, and they will look to try and change the way that the game operates in favor of making more money. And this is something that affected Diablo 3 in the most heinous and terrible of ways, and now it's infiltrating single-player titles of all things. You remember when it was just cheat codes? You remember when this stuff was just free and you just had to acquire a cheat code? If you wanted to cheat at a game, fine. You just enter a code and that's that. You know what? The sad thing about this is it's probably not even going to disable achievements or anything like that. It's not like cheating. They don't consider it cheating. They consider it being, of course, a supportive consumer, a loyal fan of the series. It's bollocks, is what it is. Under no circumstances should this ever even be an option. Why the hell should people pay for this? You're not providing anything extra. You're not doing anything. You only exchange money for goods or services. These aren't real goods. They don't exist. You're not providing an additional service. This stuff is already in the game. You're simply hardwiring cheats into the game in exchange for real-life cash. What made you think that this was okay? What could have gone through your mind that says, oh yeah, consumers will be entirely accepting of this? You know what consumers really hate? To be told to their face that they are being exploited, to be treated like cows to be milked. They hate that, and rightfully bloody so as well. I tell you, it was gonna be pretty difficult for me to be less interested in Dead Space. I've never been into the series. I'm not much of a Dead Space or indeed survival horror kind of guy. The PC ports have been laden with problems, and now you're gonna try and charge me for in-game parts? Are you mad? You're charging $60 for your game. You don't get to do that. If you want to do free-to-play, then do free-to-play. You don't get to do both. The StarCraft 2 modification Blizzard All-Stars, which was in development by Blizzard themselves as a mod custom map for StarCraft 2, seems to have kind of disappeared lately, and a report by Shack News indicates as to why. The StarCraft 2 production director Chris Sagati says it's still actively being worked on, but it is currently on hold while Blizzard works on different parts of its business model. He said that a lot of stuff that's remaining right now that they need to focus on are the systems necessary to pull off a game with a different business model than StarCraft 2. It's an interesting statement because he claims it is a game rather than a modification. He goes on to say that StarCraft 2 is a box. We intend to do something different with the business model in Blizzard All-Stars, something more closely resembling the other types of games in that genre, the MOBA-style games that are out there. So they won't officially confirm that it's a microtransaction free-to-play based game, but it's looking fairly likely at this point. He went on to say that he suspects that you won't have to have StarCraft 2 in order to play this game. They're definitely emphasizing it as its own product. It's not exactly great news. I mean, personally, I was hoping to be getting this as part of StarCraft 2, since that's what they claimed it would be from the very start. A really nice, highly polished, but otherwise fairly casual Dota-style game. But it seems like everything's kind of been thrown into flux because Valve won the trademark case with Dota for whatever reason, and as a result they couldn't call it Blizzard Dota anymore, so it's now Blizzard All-Stars, and everything's been held up, and now of course they've seen the success of League of Legends, and Would it really matter if they then ended up releasing this thing as part of the StarCraft 2 arcade? Would it actually help? There were arguments that suggested that it would, because it would be a really good custom game to get people onto Battle.net. You remember what used to do that? Yeah, Dota. That's what Dota did. Dota made Warcraft 3 far more successful than it otherwise was, because people were still buying copies 10 years after the game actually came out. Why? Because of Dota, and obviously all of the other custom maps. If you want a lot of success with something like StarCraft 2, which is in itself a fairly hardcore game that actually only really appeals to the minority of players, a lot of people just fool around in custom games, then you've got to have some strong customs, and currently we don't actually have that. Now, this is due to a wide variety of different reasons, including the way that the actual custom game arcade is set up. It's really not all that great. Blizzard is in a fairly unique position to be able to encourage more people to get onto Battle.net via the introduction of really strong, potent custom maps, which is what we hoped Blizzard All-Stars would be. There was also a rumor that they'd be releasing the Starter Edition with Blizzard All-Stars, which would thereby hopefully encourage people to upgrade to the full version of the game, and then hopefully bring more people into it. But it doesn't look like that's actually going to happen, and unfortunately, I have a feeling that this is set up for failure. I really do, because we already have a lot of Dota-style games, so we also have more casual-orientated stuff. If this came out 2 years ago, while the only competition was League, HON, and the original Dota, then this, of course, could have been a runaway success. If it came out even 1 year ago, it still could have got a lot of momentum, but we've got so many games in this genre now, and more on the way. Throwing this out as a full game just seems ridiculous. You have so much catching up to do in order to stay around in the space, and you don't have this existing StarCraft 2 playing fan base that will immediately jump on the game and make it popular. If it's not part of the StarCraft 2 client, then there are, I suppose, advantages and disadvantages to that. Firstly, the advantage would be, hey, you don't have to have StarCraft 2 to play it. Great, that brings in other people. But on the flip side, it's not a StarCraft 2 custom game, which means that less of the StarCraft 2 guys are likely to jump right into it and try it. I also hate the idea that it's going to be microtransaction based. Yet another Dota clone with microtransactions in it. And it seems kind of ridiculous. I would hope that they go down the Dota 2 route, honestly, because this was supposed to be a big promotional thing. You know how I talked about Dota 2 being a loss leader for Valve? This is exactly what Blizzard All-Stars was supposed to be. It was supposed to be a promo map for StarCraft 2 that would hopefully get more people into the game. Now, don't get me wrong, Blizzard are doing a lot of great stuff with Heart of the Swarm to encourage more casual play, but this would have been a really potent tool to get people playing StarCraft again. It really, really would. You'd be surprised at how fantastic a really good custom game can be to get people back onto the client, and in itself, that actually tempts them to play. So I'm a little concerned, let's just put it that way. We'll see how it turns out, but I am not so hopeful at this point that this would be a good game to compete in the MOBA space on its own, rather than being a really good custom map. And finally, in a day of doom and gloom by the looks of it, the developers of Tomb Raider, Crystal Dynamics, have said that they will not be bringing it to the Wii U, and the reason for that, according to creative director Noah Hughes, is that they didn't want a half-hearted port. Speaking to True Gaming, he stated that he's been a fan of Nintendo systems, and he really likes the way that they push interface design. He thinks that, from a game design perspective, they have to tailor the experience to that particular controller, rather than just put out a straight-up port. He says that all three other console and PC versions are really trying to deliver roughly the same experience, but delivering best on each platform. And I think something like the Wii U often asks you to do something unique based on a unique interface. That's something as a gamer that I love, but it's something that you don't want to do half-heartedly as a developer. Now that's an interesting attitude, isn't it? A little bit of an interesting comparison as well to the guys over at Visceral. These guys have completely the other attitude. And by the looks of it, the PC port of Tomb Raider is actually going to be really high quality and actually have the options and really have the clout behind it to make it not suck. And I don't disagree with him for the most part. I think, yes, you do have to cater to the system. However, there are times when that goes a little bit far. When you talk about catering to the system, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to shove interface options in there utilizing the technology that it has. Now, there's a fine line to be drawn here, isn't there? There's a line between not using the tools you have at your disposal because you're being lazy, and not unnecessarily catering to that system for no good gameplay reason. it's kind of the same as the way that the Wii worked. Shoving motion controls in there just because you had a motion controller was generally a bad idea. And there's a reason why a lot of games later on encourage you to either use a GameCube controller or use the classic Controller Pro. Now, this is something that the Wii U has as well. I bought one from the start, and honestly, the way that the main Wii U controller is set up is also exactly the same, if somewhat a little bigger, than a regular controller. It's got the 2 thumbsticks, it's got the triggers, it's got the bumpers. You can play any regular game on this thing because it has exactly the same controls as a PS3 or a 360. Now, do I need the touchscreen to be doing something funky and crazy in order for me to justify my purchase on the Wii U? The answer is no, I don't, and in fact, there are times when I prefer that you didn't do that. When catering to the hardware, it really comes down to performance rather than anything else. That's the most important thing. Can you make it run well? Can you take advantage of what the Wii U can do? Because, of course, there are reports of a slow CPU, yet the way the architecture is developed allows for certain things to look slightly better, and so on and so forth. That's what I want you to be catering to, not necessarily that touchscreen. And that's what he's talking about there. Everything else is pretty much regular. And honestly, if I'm playing a regular game on that system, I play it with the Pro controller. I don't play it with the big-ass tablet controller because there literally is no point. So it's unfortunate that they decided not to do that, although I will still give them kudos for thinking about it and saying, we don't want to do a half-assed port. Maybe the guys over at Visceral should take note. Okay, folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the content patch, and I will see you next time.